My name is Jeff, and for the past decade, I have chauffeured this city's late-night route, picking up the night shift workers or whoever tries to make their way someplace home. It has become my backstage pass into the rhythmic heartbeat of the city at this time, a sound rhythm that would become predictable, albeit comforting. But one night, that rhythm, it missed a beat, and what I went through, I still struggle to fully understand. It was 3 a.m., and the bus was nearly empty, just a girl sitting near the front. She was soaked with perspiration in a big coat, in an environment where the night of summer was doing anything but cool. She sat with her hands over her. The coat was very unadvisable for her little figure, and in a degree too big. It felt quite funny in this very wet air. We were coming to the bridge that goes over the river, over which she suddenly stood up, roughly enough to give me a start. "Stop the bus," she said, her voice carrying a tremor that seemed to fill the space around us. Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, and I saw fear there, raw and unfiltered. The intensity of her gaze, a piercing blue, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I complied, pulling over at the nearest stop just before the bridge, the only sounds the idling engine and the distant hum of the city. She didn't move at first, just stood there looking out the window at the dark waters below. The moonlight reflected off the ripples, casting a silvery glow that made the scene eerily beautiful. "I need to get off here," she finally whispered, more to herself than to me. Before I could respond, she hurried off the bus, leaving me with a sense of unease that knotted my stomach. I waited for a moment, watching her through the side mirror. She stood at the edge of the bridge, looking down into the river's depths. Then, without warning, she climbed over the railing and disappeared from sight. Panic surged through me as I rushed out of the bus, fearing the worst. I reached the spot where she had been standing just in time to see her pulling herself back over the railing onto the sidewalk. She was shaking, her face pale under the streetlights, but alive. Her coat was now draped around her shoulders like a protective cloak, and her breath formed misty clouds in the cool night air. "You need help," I started, reaching out to her, but she backed away, her eyes wide with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "No, you don't understand," she said, her voice a mix of relief and something darker, something haunted. I had to know if it would still stop me. Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and ran off into the night, disappearing into the shadows that clung to the city's underbelly. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had vanished, the chill of the night suddenly biting deeper. I reported the incident, but it seemed to dissolve into the night, leaving no trace behind. The woman, her panic, and her cryptic words became a horror story of my own making, whispered among the early morning shadows. The bridge, once just a part of my route, now held a sinister whisper, a reminder of the night when the city's predictable rhythm revealed a darker, more unpredictable undertone. The once mundane structure had transformed in my mind into a looming specter, its steel and concrete imbued with the memory of a soul teetering on the edge of despair. It was such a long time away, yet practically just yesterday when I think about it. I am Alex, and for a while, I was a bus driver in a small town set comfortably on the lanes of the state of Ohio, carting people to different points of town. It was just an ordinary job with ordinary days until that late October evening. The sun was down, in fact, with it getting late now, and the streets poured into, almost empty. A repulsively yellow bus, a monster offshoot from some bygone era, kept grating through the incoming fog. The interior was now so much darker, it tried casting shadows that followed zippily this way and that. A few other passengers hung around, but all were huddled in their own worlds, either looking out of their windows or spending time online scrolling on their phones. As we approached Maple Street, a figure flagged the bus down. He was an old man, dressed in a heavy coat despite it not being that cold. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but I could see a beard that seemed as old as time itself. He paid his fare in coins that looked unusually old, but I didn't think much of it then. He chose a seat near the back, and we continued on. The air inside the bus grew colder as we drove. I attributed it to the night air and thought nothing more of it until the bus lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. A shiver ran down my spine, an unexplainable feeling of unease settling over me. The passengers seemed unfazed, but the atmosphere had shifted. We were crossing the old bridge over the Willow Creek when the engine stuttered, a sound no driver wants to hear, especially not in the middle of nowhere. The bus came to a halt, right in the middle of the bridge. I announced to the passengers that I'd check what was wrong, their murmurs of discontent barely reaching me as I stepped outside. The fog was thicker now, enveloping the bridge in a ghostly embrace. The creek below flowed quietly, its waters black in the absence of light. I popped the hood and peered inside, though I'm no mechanic. Everything seemed in order, but when I tried to start the bus again, it wouldn't budge. That's when I heard it, the soft sound of footsteps on the bridge. I straightened up, expecting to see one of my passengers or perhaps a late-night jogger. But there was no one. The sound continued, slow and deliberate, coming closer, then stopping right behind me. I turned around, heart racing, but again, nothing. The cold seemed to seep into my bones, a chill that no autumn night could produce. Feeling rattled, I decided to call for assistance, but my phone showed no service. That's when I noticed it. The old man wasn't on the bus. Panic set in as I accounted for every passenger, except him. How had he left without me noticing? And where did he go on this deserted bridge? I informed the remaining passengers about the situation, their faces a mix of annoyance and concern. As we waited, the atmosphere inside the bus grew tense, the earlier calm replaced by an unsettling quiet. The lights flickered again, this time going out completely, plunging us into darkness. The rest of the night was a blur of shadows and whispered fears as we sat in the dark, waiting for help that seemed like it would never come. The old man never returned, nor was he seen again. When help finally did arrive, the bus started without issue, as if nothing had been wrong in the first place. To this day, I can't explain what happened on that bridge or who the old man was. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in and the night grows cold, I can still hear those footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer in the dark. In the sprawling suburbs of a quiet American town, I was behind the wheel of a school bus, navigating through the familiar maze of streets and cul-de-sacs. My name is Mason, and driving kids to and from school had been my routine for years, a routine so ingrained in my life that I could do it with my eyes closed. The day started like any other, with the crisp air of early October creeping through the windows I cracked open to let in some freshness. The leaves had turned a brilliant palette of oranges, reds, and yellows, painting a picturesque scene that made the mundane drive somewhat enjoyable. As the kids piled in, their chatter filled the bus, a mix of sleepy murmurs and excited plans for the upcoming Halloween. I had made a few stops already, picking up the usual crowd of kids. As I approached the 7th stop, I slowed down. There, at the edge of the road, stood a boy I had never seen before. He was alone, which wasn't unusual, but something about him felt off. He was dressed in a heavy coat, far too warm for the mild chill of the season, and his head was bowed, obscuring his face. As the bus came to a halt in front of him, he lifted his head, and I caught a glimpse of his eyes. They were a piercing blue, so intense that they seemed almost unnatural. He climbed aboard without a word, his gaze fixed straight ahead as he made his way to the back of the bus. I tried to greet him, but my voice caught in my throat, the air suddenly feeling colder. Shrugging off the uneasy feeling, I pulled away from the stop and continued on my route. I noticed in the rearview mirror that the kids didn't interact with the boy who just got on the bus, just leaving him to sit in solitude at the back. I focused on the road ahead, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. As we emerged from the wooded road and back into the sunlit suburbs, and as I made turn after turn, bringing the kids closer to their school. It was only when we arrived at the school, the bus emptying as the kids filed out, that I realized through the rearview mirror, I saw that the boy hadn't left his seat. But when I turned around to look back, there was no one on the bus. Looking again in the rearview mirror, the bus was indeed empty. The seat was empty. There was no sign of the boy, no open windows he could have slipped through, nothing. He had vanished without a trace. Confused and more than a little frightened, I checked every nook and cranny of the bus, but it was clear. The boy was gone, as if he had never been there in the first place. I reported the incident to the school, but no one had heard of the boy. It was as if the boy had been a figment of my imagination. But I know what I saw, and the memory of those piercing blue eyes haunts me to this day.